The gunshot echoed across the rolling plains, sending a flock of startled birds into the crisp morning air as the Wyoming stagecoach lurched violently to one side. Faith Turner clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, her knuckles white with fear as the coach came to an abrupt halt on the dusty trail just 15 miles outside of Carlin, Wyoming territory, in the summer of 1878. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," the driver called out, his voice betraying his own panic. "We're being robbed." Faith's heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced at her fellow passengers, an elderly couple who clung to each other in terror, and a portly banker whose face had drained of all color. At 22, Faith was traveling alone from Boston to Carlin to take a position as the town's new schoolteacher, carrying everything she owned in one trunk and her life savings sewn into a hidden pocket of her dress. "Out, everybody out now," a gruff voice demanded from outside. The stagecoach door was wrenched open, revealing a man with a dirty bandana covering the lower half of his face, his revolver aimed directly at them. Two more masked men on horseback flanked the coach, their weapons drawn. "Valuables in the bag," the first robber commanded, throwing a burlap sack into the coach. Watches, money, jewelry, all of it. Faith's hand instinctively went to the collar of her dress, where a small gold locket containing a miniature portrait of her late mother hung from a delicate chain. It was her most precious possession, not for its monetary value, but for the memory it held. The banker was the first to comply, dropping his wallet and pocket watch into the bag with trembling hands. The elderly couple followed suit, the woman quietly sobbing as she removed her wedding band. When the bag reached Faith, she hesitated, her fingers still touching the locket. "The necklace too, miss," the robber said, his voice hardening as he pointed his gun directly at her face. "Don't make me ask twice." Faith's vision blurred with tears as she slowly unclasped the locket. Just as her fingers released the chain into the bag, a single shot rang out from the ridge above them. The robber nearest to Faith jerked backward, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his fingers. The other outlaws spun around, firing wildly toward the source of the shot. From the rocky outcropping above the trail, a lone rider emerged, a rifle balanced confidently in his hands. He fired twice more in rapid succession, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. One robber fell from his horse while the other wheeled his mount around and fled, disappearing into the shroud of dust kicked up by his horse's hooves. The wounded robber who had been collecting the valuables stumbled backward, dropping the bag as he reached for his gun. Before he could aim, the stranger was upon him, leaping from his horse and tackling the outlaw to the ground. A brief struggle ensued before the stranger delivered a knockout blow, rendering the robber unconscious. As the dust settled, Faith found herself staring at their rescuer. He stood tall, the sun at his back casting his face in shadow beneath the wide brim of his dark hat. His duster coat flapped gently in the breeze as he holstered his revolver with practiced ease. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, his voice deep but surprisingly gentle. The passengers nodded mutely, still too shocked to speak. Faith watched as the stranger retrieved the bag of valuables and handed it back to them. "You folks should take what's yours," he said. When the bag reached Faith, she quickly reclaimed her mother's locket, clutching it to her heart before fastening it back around her neck. The stranger turned to secure the unconscious robber, binding his hands with a length of rope from his saddle. Only then did Faith get a proper look at him. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with intense blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his sun-bronzed skin. A thin scar traced the line of his jaw, disappearing beneath several days' worth of stubble. "Thank you, sir," Faith finally managed, finding her voice. "You saved our lives." He tipped his hat slightly but didn't smile. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time, madam. May we know the name of our rescuer?" the banker asked, having regained some of his composure. The man hesitated, as if weighing whether to answer. "Isaac Thorne," he said finally, before turning back to his horse. "Mr. Thorne," Faith called out, stepping forward, "you're wounded." Isaac glanced down at his arm, where a bullet had grazed him during the exchange of gunfire, leaving a bloody tear in his shirt sleeve. "It's nothing," he replied dismissively. Faith retrieved her handkerchief from her pocket and approached him cautiously. "Please, let me at least bind it until you can see a proper doctor." A shadow of something reluctance, perhaps, or discomfort crossed Isaac's features, but he nodded once, allowing her to wrap the cloth around his arm. Faith worked quickly, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. "You heading to Carlin?" Isaac asked, watching her work. "Yes, I'm to be the new schoolteacher there," Faith replied. A flash of recognition crossed his face. "Town's been waiting for you. Sheriff mentioned it." Before Faith could respond, the stagecoach driver cleared his throat. "We should get moving if we want to make it to Carlin before nightfall." "Mr. Thorne, would you be willing to escort us the rest of the way? I'd feel a sight better with someone like you riding alongside." Isaac nodded, glancing at the bound robber. "I'll bring this one in to the sheriff too." As they prepared to continue their journey, Faith caught Isaac looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something haunted in those blue eyes, something that spoke of pain and loss far deeper than the physical wound on his arm. In that moment, Faith realized that while Isaac Thorne had rescued them from danger, there was a part of him that remained trapped somewhere far more perilous than this dusty trail. The stagecoach rolled into Carlin just as the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Faith had spent most of the journey stealing glances at their silent protector, who rode alongside them with his prisoner secured to a second horse he'd commandeered from one of the fallen robbers. Despite her attempts at conversation whenever they stopped to rest the horses, Isaac had remained largely taciturn, answering her questions with the fewest words possible. Carlin was smaller than Faith had imagined, a single main street lined with wooden buildings in various states of repair. A general store, saloon, hotel, and small church formed the heart of the settlement, with modest houses scattered around the periphery. Despite its size, the town seemed alive with activity as the stagecoach approached, people moving purposefully along the boardwalks as they completed their evening business. The coach came to a stop outside the sheriff's office, a sturdy building with a large star painted on the door. Isaac dismounted in one fluid motion, untying the sullen robber from his horse. "Sheriff Miller," Isaac called out as a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper mustache emerged from the office. "Got a present for you." The sheriff's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Thorne, you son of a gun. Don't tell me you caught one of the Tucker boys on your own," Isaac shrugged. "Had some help from the weather. Storms coming in from the north, they were in a hurry to rob the stage before it hit." Faith watched this exchange from the coach window, noting how different Isaac seemed when speaking with the sheriff, not exactly relaxed, but certainly more at ease than he had been with the passengers. The driver opened the door, offering his hand to help Faith down. Her legs felt stiff after the long journey, and she stumbled slightly as she stepped onto the street. Isaac, who had just handed off the prisoner to the sheriff, moved with surprising speed to steady her, his strong hands catching her elbow. "Careful," he said softly, his touch vanishing as quickly as it had appeared once she was stable. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," Faith said, meeting his gaze, "for everything today." He nodded once, then turned back to the sheriff, who was now eyeing Faith with interest. "You must be Miss Turner, our new schoolteacher," Sheriff Miller said, extending his hand. "Town council's been counting the days till your arrival. School's been closed since old Mrs. Pendleton passed last winter." "Yes, I'm Faith Turner," she confirmed, shaking his hand. "I'm eager to begin my duties. I understand the new term is to start in 2 weeks." "That's right," the sheriff nodded. "We've got the schoolhouse all ready for you. Just needs a woman's touch, I expect." He gestured to a short, plump woman hurrying down the boardwalk toward them. "Here's Mrs. Thompson now. She's on the town council and offered to get you settled." Mrs. Thompson, a cheerful woman in her 50s with rosy cheeks and kind eyes, greeted Faith warmly. "My dear, we're so pleased you've arrived safely. When we heard about robberies along the trail, we were beside ourselves with worry. I was fortunate that Mr. Thorne intervened," Faith explained, glancing toward Isaac, who was now engaged in quiet conversation with the sheriff. "Isaac Thorne." Mrs. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, that is fortunate indeed. He doesn't usually involve himself in other people's troubles. Before Faith could inquire further about this curious statement, Mrs. Thompson took her arm. Come along, dear. I've prepared a room for you at our boarding house until you decide if you want to take up residence in the small teacher's cottage behind the school. As Mrs. Thompson led her away, Faith looked back over her shoulder. Isaac was watching her, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, turning back to the sheriff's office. Mrs. Thompson, Faith began as they walked, what can you tell me about Mr. Thorne? The older woman glanced at her with knowing eyes. Handsome fellow, isn't he? But troubled, I'm afraid. Keeps to himself mostly, has a small ranch a few miles outside town. Was a cavalry scout during the war, though he was just a boy when he joined up. Some say he was one of those sharpshooters could hit a playing card from 100 yards. He seems guarded, Faith observed. That's putting it mildly, Mrs. Thompson replied. Lost his family when he was young, then saw too much during the war, I expect. Been here about 3 years now, but I'd wager most folks in town have never heard him string more than 10 words together. She patted Faith's arm. But that's enough about Isaac Thorne. Let's get you settled in. You must be exhausted after your journey and that dreadful ordeal. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a wide front porch adorned with potted flowers. Inside, it was modestly furnished but spotlessly clean, with a small parlor and dining room on the first floor. Mrs. Thompson showed Faith to a corner room on the second floor, where her trunk had already been delivered. Supper will be ready in about an hour, Mrs. Thompson informed her. Just enough time for you to freshen up. Left alone, Faith moved to the window, which offered a view of the main street. She could see the sheriff's office, where Isaac was now mounting his horse. She watched as he rode slowly out of town, his straight-backed silhouette gradually fading into the gathering twilight. Faith wondered about the demons that haunted a man like Isaac Thorne, demons that kept him isolated from the very people whose lives he had saved today. As she unpinned her hair and began to brush out the dust of travel, she found herself unable to forget those intense blue eyes and the flicker of pain she had glimpsed within them. The following morning, Faith rose early, eager to see the schoolhouse that would become her domain. After a hearty breakfast provided by Mrs. Thompson, she set out down the main street, nodding politely to the townspeople she passed. Many stopped to introduce themselves, welcoming her warmly to Carlin. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a small bell tower. Behind it was the teacher's cottage. Mrs. Thompson had mentioned, a snug little building with a narrow porch and a small garden plot, now overgrown with weeds. Faith used the key she'd been given to unlock the schoolhouse door. Inside, she found a single room with rows of desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. Shelves lined one wall, holding a modest collection of books. The room was clean but bare, awaiting her personal touch to transform it into a place of learning. As she was examining the books on the shelf, the door opened behind her. Faith turned, expecting to see Mrs. Thompson or perhaps another member of the town council. Instead, Isaac Thorne stood in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. He had cleaned up since yesterday, shaved, his hair trimmed, wearing a fresh shirt beneath his worn leather vest. Mr. Thorne, Faith said, surprised. Good morning. Miss Turner, he replied with a slight nod. He seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his hat in his hands. Sheriff asked me to check if you needed any repairs done to the schoolhouse before term starts. That's very kind, Faith replied. Please come in. Isaac stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room with the alertness she had noticed yesterday. He moved to the windows, testing each one, then examined the stove in the corner and the roof beams overhead. Roof needs some work, he said after a few minutes. Few shingles missing. Stovepipe should be cleaned before winter, otherwise it's sound. Faith watched him move about the room, struck by the economy of his movements and words. Would you be willing to make the repairs, Mr. Thorne? I'd be happy to compensate you for your time. A shadow crossed his face. No need for payment, I can do it. Thank you. Faith hesitated, then added, Your arm, how is it today? Isaac glanced down at where she had bound his wound yesterday. Fine, barely a scratch. An awkward silence fell between them. Faith, normally comfortable with conversation, found herself struggling to find words. There was something about Isaac's presence that was both intimidating and compelling. "I never properly thanked you," she said finally. "What you did yesterday was incredibly brave." Isaac shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just did what needed doing. Nevertheless, I owe you my life and my mother's locket." Faith touched the small gold pendant at her throat. "It's all I have left of her." For the first time, Isaac's expression softened slightly. "Glad you got it back." Another silence fell, but this one felt less strained. Faith moved to the teacher's desk, running her fingers along its scarred wooden surface. "Have you lived in Carlin long, Mr. Thorne?" "3 years," he replied, replacing his hat on his head. "I should get to those repairs. Be back tomorrow with supplies." Before Faith could respond, he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him. She stood for a moment, staring at the empty doorway, puzzled by the brief interaction. There was something about Isaac Thorne that called to her a sadness in his eyes that made her wonder what stories lay behind them. Shaking herself from these thoughts, Faith turned back to her examination of the schoolhouse. She had work to do if she was to be ready for her students in 2 weeks. Over the next several days, Faith threw herself into preparing for the school term. She cleaned and organized the schoolhouse, arranged the books on the shelves, and created lesson plans for students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The town council had provided her with a list of expected pupils, 27 children from the town and surrounding farms. True to his word, Isaac returned the next day with supplies to repair the roof and clean the stovepipe. Faith tried to engage him in conversation as he worked, but his responses remained brief and to the point. Still, she noticed that each day he stayed a little longer, gradually becoming more comfortable in her presence. By the end of the first week, Faith had moved from the boarding house into the teacher's cottage. It was small but suited her needs perfectly, with a bedroom, a cozy sitting room, a simple kitchen, and a small bathing room. She had cleared the garden plot and planted some late-season vegetables, hoping they would mature before the first frost. It was while she was working in this garden that she next encountered Isaac. She was on her knees, pulling weeds, when a shadow fell across the ground beside her. Looking up, she found him standing at the edge of the garden, holding the reins of his horse. "Mr. Thorne," Faith said, brushing dirt from her hands as she stood. "I didn't hear you approach." "Habit," he said simply, then gestured to his horse. "Brought you something." For the first time, Faith noticed a burlap sack tied to his saddle. Isaac untied it and held it out to her. "Apples," he explained when she looked questioningly at him. "From my orchard, thought you might like some." Faith was touched by the unexpected gesture. "That's very kind of you, thank you." She accepted the sack, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Isaac withdrew his hand quickly, but not before Faith noticed the slight tremor that passed through it. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Thorne?" Faith offered, gesturing toward her cottage. "It's the least I can offer in return for the apples and all the repair work you've done." Isaac hesitated, and for a moment Faith thought he would refuse. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "Could use some coffee, thank you." He tethered his horse to the fence post and followed Faith into the cottage. Inside, he stood awkwardly in the middle of her small sitting room, hat in hand, while she busied herself with the coffee pot in the kitchen area. "Please sit down," Faith encouraged, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs by the small hearth. Isaac perched on the edge of the chair, looking distinctly out of place amid Faith's feminine touches, the crocheted doilies on the armrests, the vase of wildflowers on the table, the colorful quilt draped over the back of the other chair. "You've made it homey," he observed, his eyes taking in the room. "I like to be surrounded by beautiful things," Faith explained as she set the coffee pot to boil. "Even simple ones. Never saw much point in decorations myself," Isaac replied. "What is your home like?" Faith asked, genuinely curious, simple, functional. He paused. "Quiet." "Do you live alone at your ranch?" Isaac nodded. "Just me and the horses." "That sounds lonely," Faith ventured. "I'm used to it," he said, but something in his voice made Faith wonder if that was entirely true. The coffee pot began to whistle, and Faith busied herself pouring 2 cups. She handed one to Isaac, who accepted it with a murmured thanks. Faith took the seat opposite him, cradling her own cup in her hands. "How did you come to Carlin?" she asked. Isaac took a sip of coffee before answering. "Was passing through, saw the ranch for sale. Price was right." He paused. "Needed somewhere quiet." "After the war?" Faith asked softly. Isaac's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Mrs. Thompson talks too much." "She mentioned you were in the cavalry," Faith explained, "but nothing more specific." Isaac stared into his coffee cup. "Was a scout, then a sharpshooter, saw things no boy should see." He fell silent, and Faith sensed he would say no more on the subject. "I lost my parents in the war," Faith offered, hoping to establish some common ground. "My father was a doctor with the Union Army. My mother was helping at a field hospital when it was shelled." She swallowed hard, the memory still painful even after all these years. "I was 14. Isaac's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry. I was raised by my aunt in Boston after that," Faith continued. "She did her best, but she never approved of my desire to become a teacher. When I saw the advertisement for a position in Wyoming territory, I knew it was my chance to make my own way in the world." "Brave," Isaac commented. "Coming all this way alone," Faith smiled. "Or foolish, perhaps, if you hadn't been there yesterday." "But I was," Isaac said firmly. They lapsed into silence, but it was comfortable now, each lost in their own thoughts as they sipped their coffee. Faith studied Isaac covertly, noting the way the light from the window highlighted the golden undertones in his brown hair and softened the hard lines of his face. Despite his formidable presence, there was something vulnerable about him that touched her heart. "Would you stay for supper, Mr. Thorne?" Faith asked impulsively. "I've made a stew and there's plenty." Isaac looked startled by the invitation. "I should get back to your empty house." Faith pressed gently. "Surely the horses can wait another hour." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, longing, perhaps, or uncertainty. Finally, he nodded. "Could eat, I suppose." Faith smiled, pleased by his acceptance. As she moved to the kitchen area to check on her stew, she glanced back to find Isaac watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, but not before Faith caught a glimpse of something that made her heart beat faster, a warmth that belied his cool exterior. For the first time since arriving in Carlin, Faith felt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Supper was a simple affair: venison stew with root vegetables, fresh bread that Mrs. Thompson had given Faith that morning, and sliced apples for dessert. Isaac ate with the efficiency of a man accustomed to viewing food as fuel rather than pleasure, but he accepted a second helping when Faith offered it. Their conversation remained somewhat stilted, with Faith doing most of the talking. She told him about her teaching experience in Boston, her love of literature, and her hopes for her students in Carlin. Isaac listened attentively, occasionally asking a brief but thoughtful question that revealed he was genuinely engaged in what she was saying. As they finished their meal, the light outside began to fade, casting long shadows through the cottage windows. "I should go," Isaac said, rising from his chair. "Getting dark." "Of course," Faith replied, standing as well. "Thank you for the apples, Mr. Thorne." "Isaac," he said quietly. "You can call me Isaac," Faith smiled, pleased by this small sign of growing familiarity between them. "Isaac, then, and I'm Faith," he nodded, reaching for his hat. "Faith," he repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you." He moved to the door, Faith following. At the threshold, he paused, turning back to her. For a moment, he seemed on the verge of saying something more, but then he simply nodded. "Good night, Faith." "Good night, Isaac," she replied. "Ride safely." She stood in the doorway, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away, his figure gradually disappearing into the twilight. Only when he was completely out of sight did Faith close the door, leaning against it with a sigh. There was something about Isaac Thorne that fascinated her, a depth of character, beneath his taciturn exterior, that called to her like a puzzle waiting to be solved. But more than that, there was a connection between them that Faith couldn't quite define, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both known loss and emerged stronger for it. As Faith readied herself for bed that night, she found herself wondering when she would see Isaac again, and hoping it would be soon. The 2 weeks before the start of the school term passed swiftly. Faith finished preparing the schoolhouse, met with parents and town council members, and settled into the rhythms of life in Carlin. She saw Isaac occasionally, sometimes in town collecting supplies, once at church, where he sat at the very back and left immediately after the service, and twice more at her cottage when he brought her fresh vegetables from his garden. Each time they met, Isaac seemed a little more at ease in her presence. Their conversations gradually lengthened, though he remained reticent about his past. Faith learned that he was 28 years old, had joined the Union Army at 16 by lying about his age, and had wandered for several years after the war before settling in Carlin. The rest remained a mystery she was determined to unravel. The first day of school arrived on a crisp Monday morning in early September. Faith rose before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in her best navy blue skirt and white blouse, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and set out for the schoolhouse well before the students were due to arrive. As she approached the building, Faith was surprised to see a figure standing on the porch. Isaac, dressed in clean clothes, his hat in his hands. "Isaac," Faith greeted him warmly. "What brings you here so early? Wanted to wish you luck," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance. "You look nice." Faith felt her cheeks warm at the simple compliment. "Thank you, I'm a bit nervous, to tell the truth." "You'll do fine," Isaac assured her with quiet confidence. "Kids need someone who cares, you do." The simple statement touched Faith deeply. "That means a lot coming from you." Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden object, holding it out to her. "Made you something. For luck." Faith accepted the gift, turning it over in her hands. It was a beautifully carved apple, small enough to fit in her palm, the wood polished to a warm glow. "Isaac, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingertips over the smooth surface. "Did you carve this?" He nodded, looking pleased but embarrassed by her reaction. "Something to do in the evenings." "I'll treasure it," Faith said sincerely. "Thank you." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Isaac cleared his throat. "Should let you get ready for your students." "Will I see you again soon?" Faith asked, reluctant to see him go. Isaac hesitated. "Town's having that harvest dance on Saturday. You going, Mrs. Thompson mentioned it," Faith replied. "I hadn't decided. Could escort you," Isaac offered, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder. "If you wanted." Faith's heart skipped a beat at the unexpected invitation. "I would like that very much." For the first time since she'd met him, Isaac smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his blue eyes. "Good. I'll call for you at 7. With that, he placed his hat on his head, nodded once, and strode away, leaving Faith standing on the schoolhouse porch with the wooden apple clutched in her hand, and a smile she couldn't suppress spreading across her face. The first week of school passed in a blur of activity. Faith found herself challenged but exhilarated by her diverse group of students, from shy 6-year-old Emma Davis to 17-year-old Luke Patterson, who attended school only when his father didn't need him on their ranch. By Saturday, Faith was exhausted but happy. She had successfully navigated her first week as Carlin's teacher and had begun to form connections with her pupils. As she prepared for the harvest dance, selecting her best dress, a moss green creation with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, Faith reflected on how quickly Carlin had begun to feel like home. And much of that, she admitted to herself as she pinned up her hair, was due to Isaac Thorne. Though their interactions had been brief and infrequent, each one had left her more intrigued by the quiet, intense man who had saved her life and then, slowly, begun to emerge from his self-imposed isolation. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Faith took a deep breath, smoothing her skirts one last time before opening it. Isaac stood on her porch, and the sight of him momentarily took her breath away. He was dressed in what were clearly his best clothes, a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and black trousers. His hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved closely, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the small scar that traced it. "Good evening, Isaac," Faith greeted him, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Faith," he replied, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful." The sincerity in his voice made Faith's cheeks warm. "Thank you, you look very handsome yourself." Isaac offered his arm and Faith took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. They walked in companionable silence toward the town hall where the dance was being held. As they approached, the sounds of fiddle music and laughter spilled into the street. "Been a while since I've been to a dance," Isaac confessed as they reached the door. "How long?" Faith asked. "Since before the war," he admitted. Faith squeezed his arm gently. "We don't have to stay long if you're uncomfortable." Isaac shook his head. "Want to be here, with you." The simple statement sent a warm glow through Faith's chest. As they entered the hall, several heads turned in their direction. Faith was used to attracting attention as the new schoolteacher, but she suspected much of the interest was due to Isaac's presence. From what Mrs. Thompson had told her, Isaac rarely participated in town social events. The hall had been festively decorated with autumn leaves, corn stalks, and lanterns that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played at one end, and couples were already dancing in the cleared center of the room. Tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. Sheriff Miller approached them almost immediately, his eyebrows raised in surprise as he took in Isaac's presence. "Miss Turner, you look lovely tonight, and Isaac didn't expect to see you here." Isaac nodded in greeting but offered no explanation for his attendance. Faith smoothly filled the silence. "Mr. Thorne was kind enough to escort me. This is my first social event in Carlin." "Well, you couldn't ask for a better protector," Miller said with a knowing glance at Isaac. "Though I reckon most folks in town will be on their best behavior with the schoolmarm present." As the evening progressed, Faith was introduced to more townspeople and parents of her students. Isaac remained by her side, quiet but attentive. Though he spoke little, Faith noticed how his eyes constantly scanned the room, alert to everything happening around them. It was, she realized, the habit of a man accustomed to danger, always watching, always ready. When the band struck up a waltz, Faith turned to Isaac questioningly. "Do you dance?" A shadow crossed his face. "Been a long time. I'm a patient teacher," Faith offered with a smile. After a moment's hesitation, Isaac extended his hand. "Could try." He led her onto the dance floor, his movements stiff and uncertain at first. Faith gently guided him through the steps, and gradually, his natural grace asserted itself. By the end of the song, they were moving together in perfect harmony, Isaac's hand warm and strong at the small of her back. As the music ended, Isaac didn't immediately release her. Their eyes met, and Faith saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch a yearning, a vulnerability that he usually kept carefully hidden. "Faith," he began, his voice low. Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Thompson, who insisted on introducing Faith to her nephew, who had just arrived from Denver. Isaac stepped back, the shutters closing over his expression once more. For the next hour, Faith was pulled into conversations with various townspeople, always aware of Isaac's presence nearby, watching over her. When she finally managed to make her way back to his side, she found him engaged in a quiet conversation with Sheriff Miller, their expressions serious. "Everything all right?" Faith asked as she joined them. The two men exchanged a glance before Miller answered. "Just sheriff business, Miss Turner, nothing for you to worry about." But Faith caught the tension in Isaac's jaw and knew there was more to it. When the sheriff moved away, she turned to Isaac. "What's wrong?" Isaac hesitated before answering. Sheriffs had word that the remaining Tucker brothers, the ones that got away during the stagecoach robbery, might be planning something. Revenge, maybe. A chill ran down Faith's spine. "Revenge against whom?" "Me, most likely," Isaac said matter-of-factly. "I killed one of their brothers and helped put another in jail." "That's terrible," Faith said, instinctively moving closer to him. "Are you in danger?" Isaac shrugged. "Always some danger in these parts." "But I can handle the Tuckers." Faith wasn't reassured by his casual dismissal. "Promise me you'll be careful." Something softened in Isaac's expression. "I promise." The remainder of the evening passed without incident, but Faith noticed that Isaac seemed more vigilant than before, his eyes constantly moving to the doors and windows of the hall. When the dance ended around midnight, he insisted on walking her home, despite her cottage being only a short distance away. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered like diamonds across the black velvet sky. They walked in silence, but it was a comfortable one, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the soft sound of their footsteps on the dirt path. At Faith's door, Isaac hesitated. Should check around the cottage, make sure everything's secure. Faith waited on the porch while he circled the small building, examining windows and doors with a thoroughness that spoke of his training. When he returned to her side, he nodded. All clear. Thank you for escorting me tonight, Isaac, Faith said softly. I had a wonderful time. So did I, he replied, and she could tell he meant it. Been a long time since I enjoyed myself at a gathering. Perhaps we could do it again sometime, Faith suggested, her heart beating faster at her own boldness. Isaac's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a mixture of longing and hesitation. I'd like that. They stood for a moment in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then, slowly, Isaac reached out and took her hand in his. His touch was gentle, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. Good night, Faith, he whispered. Good night, Isaac, she replied, her voice barely audible. He released her hand reluctantly and stepped back, watching as she entered her cottage. Faith closed the door behind her, then moved to the window, drawing aside the curtain just enough to see Isaac still standing in the yard, his face turned toward her home. Only when she lit her lamp did he finally turn and walk away into the darkness. Faith pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss on her skin. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with Isaac Thorne, and she suspected he was beginning to feel the same way about her. The following weeks brought a deepening of the connection between Faith and Isaac. He began to appear regularly at her cottage in the evenings, sometimes bringing small gifts, fresh game, vegetables from his garden, or another of his beautiful wood carvings. They would share simple meals, and gradually, Isaac began to open up about his life. He told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. About losing his parents to typhoid when he was 12 and being raised by an uncle who treated him more as free labor than family. About lying about his age to join the Union Army at 16, desperate to escape his uncle's cruelty and find a purpose. Was good at tracking, good with a rifle, he explained one evening as they sat by Faith's hearth, the first autumn chill having settled over Carlin. Got assigned as a scout. Later, when they saw how I could shoot, they made me a sharpshooter. That must have been difficult, Faith said softly, noting the shadow that crossed his face at the memory. Killing men from a distance changes you, Isaac admitted, staring into the flames. They never see it coming. Just going about their day then. He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists in his lap. Faith reached out, covering one of his hands with hers. You were a soldier doing your duty. That's what I tell myself, Isaac replied, his voice hollow. Doesn't help with the nightmares. Is that why you keep to yourself? Faith asked gently. The nightmares. Isaac was silent for a long moment before answering. Partly, after the war, tried to go back to normal life, worked as a blacksmith like my father, but the memories wouldn't let me be, started drinking to quiet them. He paused, shame evident in his face. Became someone I didn't recognize, someone mean and broken. What changed? Faith prompted when he fell silent again. Nearly killed a man in a bar fight, Isaac said bluntly. Woke up in jail, covered in his blood. Sheriff there told me I had a choice: prison or start over somewhere else. He looked up at Faith, his blue eyes intense. Wandered for years, took whatever work I could find, kept moving whenever the memories got too loud. Until you came to Carlin, Faith finished for him. Isaac nodded. Place felt right somehow, quiet, remote. People minded their own business, bought the ranch, started working with horses, found some peace. And now, Faith asked, her heart beating faster as she ventured into more personal territory. Are you still looking for peace? Isaac's eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. Found something better, found hope. The simple statement, delivered in his straightforward way, moved Faith deeply. She squeezed his hand, unable to find words to express what his confession meant to her. Isaac turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. Never thought I'd feel this way again. Never thought I deserved to. Everyone deserves happiness, Isaac, Faith said softly, Even former soldiers with troubled pasts, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. You make it easy to believe that. They sat in companionable silence, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Isaac finally rose to leave, he seemed reluctant to break the connection between them. "Sunday after church," he said as he stood at her door. "Would you ride out to my ranch with me? Like to show you the place." Faith smiled, pleased by the invitation. "I'd love to." Isaac nodded, satisfied. "I'll bring a wagon for you." As promised, Isaac arrived with a wagon on Sunday after church services. Faith had prepared a picnic lunch, and they set out for his ranch under a clear autumn sky. The air was crisp, but the sun warm as they traveled the 5 miles outside of town, following a winding trail that led into the foothills. Isaac's ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest cabin with a large barn and corral, nestled in a protected valley with a creek running alongside it. Beyond the immediate clearing, Faith could see an apple orchard and grazing land that stretched toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Faith said sincerely as Isaac helped her down from the wagon. "Not much," Isaac replied, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "But it's mine. Honest work, honest living." He showed her around the property, the barn where he bred and trained horses, the small orchard that produced the apples he had brought her, the workshop where he crafted his wood carvings in the evenings. The cabin was last, and Isaac seemed uncharacteristically nervous as he opened the door for her. Inside, the cabin was as Faith had imagined, simple and functional, with minimal decoration. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, which contained a table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf that surprised Faith with its contents. Classics like Shakespeare and Dickens shared space with history books and practical guides to ranching and horsemanship. "You read Shakespeare?" Faith asked, running her fingers along the spine of a well-worn copy of Hamlet. "When I can't sleep," Isaac admitted. "Words help quiet my mind sometimes." Faith turned to him, seeing him in a new light. This man, who spoke so sparingly in person, found solace in the richness of Shakespeare's language. The contradiction touched her deeply. "Would you read to me sometime?" she asked. Isaac looked surprised by the request. "If you'd like." They shared their picnic lunch on a blanket by the creek, the sun warming them despite the autumn chill in the air. Faith had never seen Isaac so relaxed, his usual vigilance softened by the security of being on his own land. As they ate, Isaac pointed out the features of his property where he planned to expand the orchard next spring, how he was breeding his horses for both strength and gentleness, the spot where he'd seen a family of deer that morning. "You love it here," Faith observed, watching the animation in his face as he spoke of his plans. "First place that's felt like home since I was a boy," Isaac confirmed. "Peaceful." After they had eaten, Isaac suggested showing her his favorite spot on the property. They walked along the creek, following it upstream to where it widened into a small pool beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees. The leaves had turned golden, some already fallen to create a carpet underfoot. "Come here when things get too loud in my head," Isaac explained as they stood by the water's edge. "Sound of the creek helps." Faith understood what he meant. The gentle burbling of the water over stones created a soothing background to the occasional call of birds and the whisper of the breeze through the cottonwood leaves. It was a place of healing, she could feel it. "Thank you for sharing this with me," Faith said, turning to face him. "For sharing all of it." Isaac's eyes met hers, and she saw in them a vulnerability that he rarely allowed anyone to glimpse. Never brought anyone here before. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Faith's heart pounded as Isaac took a step closer to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Faith," he said, his voice low and uncertain, "I'm not good with words, not like the books, but I need to tell you." He paused, seemed to gather his courage. "You've changed something in me, made me want to live again, not just survive." Faith's breath caught in her throat. "Isaac, let me finish," he said gently. "Need to say this. I know I'm not what most women would want. I'm broken in ways that might never heal completely. But whatever I am, whatever I have, it's yours, if you want it." Tears filled Faith's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. In that moment, She knew with absolute certainty that she loved this complicated, damaged, wonderful man who had rescued her on the trail and then, somehow, allowed her to begin rescuing him from the prison of his own mind. "I do want it," she whispered. "I want you, Isaac, just as you are." Something like wonder crossed Isaac's face. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. Faith leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. And then, with infinite gentleness, Isaac bent his head and kissed her. The kiss was tentative at first, as if he feared she might vanish beneath his touch. But when Faith's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, Isaac responded with a depth of feeling that took her breath away. His arms encircled her waist, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the dance," he confessed. Faith smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I've been hoping you would." They stood together by the creek for a long time, talking softly, sharing occasional kisses, planning a future neither had dared to imagine before. As the afternoon light began to fade, Isaac reluctantly suggested they should start back to town. "School tomorrow," he reminded her, though he made no move to release her from his embrace. Faith nodded, equally reluctant to end their perfect day. "Will you come to supper tomorrow evening?" she asked. "Try and stop me," Isaac replied with a smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and unburdened if only for a moment. As they walked back to the wagon, hand in hand, Faith felt a contentment she had never known before. In this quiet man with his hidden depths and wounded soul, she had found her home. And in her, Isaac had found the faith to believe in second chances. Their courtship progressed swiftly after that day at the creek. Isaac became a regular visitor at Faith's cottage, often arriving as soon as school ended to help her with various tasks before sharing supper with her. The townspeople quickly became accustomed to seeing them together, and if anyone was surprised by the taciturn rancher's attraction to the refined schoolteacher, they kept their thoughts to themselves. Sheriff Miller, however, took Isaac aside one evening in late October as they left the general store. Faith pretended to be examining fabric in the window while the two men talked, but she could see the seriousness in both their expressions. What did the sheriff want? She asked as they walked back to her cottage, Isaac carrying her purchases. Isaac's jaw tightened slightly. "Tucker Brothers, they've been spotted near Carson City." Faith's heart sank. The threat of the remaining outlaws had receded from her mind in recent weeks, overshadowed by her growing relationship with Isaac and her duties at the school. "Do you think they're coming here?" "Possibly," Isaac admitted. "They've been asking questions about me, about you." Faith stumbled slightly and Isaac's arm shot out to steady her. "About me? Why would they care about me?" Isaac's expression was grim. "Because they know you matter to me, makes you a target." A chill ran down Faith's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done weeks ago," Isaac replied, his voice hardening. "Hunt them down before they come here." "No," Faith grabbed his arm, fear clutching at her heart. "Isaac, you can't go after them alone. It's too dangerous." "More dangerous to wait until they come to Carlin," Isaac argued. "Won't risk them hurting you or anyone else in town." They had reached Faith's cottage, but she made no move to enter, still holding tightly to Isaac's arm. "Please, Isaac, there must be another way." Isaac's expression softened as he looked down at her, freeing one hand to gently touch her cheek. "Sheriff's wiring the marshal's office in Carson City. They might send someone to help, but if they don't, then let the sheriff help you," Faith pleaded. "Don't face them alone." Isaac was silent for a long moment before nodding. "I'll wait to hear from the marshal, but Faith, if they come here, I'll do whatever I must to protect you." "Understand," Faith nodded, knowing there would be no dissuading him from this. "Promise me you'll be careful. I've only just found you. I couldn't bear to lose you now." In response, Isaac drew her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Faith could hear the steady beat of his heart, feel the solid strength of him surrounding her. In his embrace, she could almost believe that nothing bad could touch them. "Not planning on going anywhere," Isaac murmured into her hair. "Got too much to live for now." The following week brought the first snowfall of the season, a light dusting that melted by midday, but served as a reminder that winter was approaching. Faith added extra wood to the schoolhouse stove each morning, and her students arrived bundled in scarves and mittens knitted by careful mothers. Isaac had taken to escorting Faith to and from school each day, his concern for her safety evident in his constant vigilance. Faith knew he was sleeping poorly, his nightmares exacerbated by the threat hanging over them. More than once, she had seen him scanning the distant hills with narrowed eyes, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. On Friday afternoon, as school was ending, Sheriff Miller arrived at the schoolhouse. Faith was helping her youngest students into their coats when she noticed the sheriff and Isaac in serious conversation by the door. Isaac's expression was grim, his posture tense. After the last child had departed, Faith approached the two men. "What's happened?" Miller glanced at Isaac before answering. "Got a wire from the marshal's office. Tucker brothers were spotted in Elko 2 days ago heading this way." Faith's stomach clenched with fear. "How many of them are there?" "3, Isaac answered. "Plus whatever hired guns they've picked up along the way. Marshal's sending a deputy," Miller continued, "but he won't get here before Monday at the earliest. And the Tuckers could be here by tomorrow," Isaac concluded. Miller nodded. "I've asked some of the townsmen to help keep watch. But Isaac here thinks you should stay in town tonight, Miss Turner. Your cottage is too isolated if they come looking." "I can take care of myself," Faith protested, though the thought of facing armed outlaws alone sent a shiver down her spine. "Not against men like the Tuckers," Isaac said firmly. "You're staying with Mrs. Thompson tonight. And what about you?" Faith challenged. "Will you be staying in town too?" Isaac and the sheriff exchanged a look that Faith couldn't interpret. "Got something to take care of first," Isaac said evasively. "Then I'll be at the hotel." Faith knew him well enough by now to recognize when he was holding something back. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Isaac replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. Faith wanted to argue, but the determined set of Isaac's jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she nodded reluctantly. "Fine, I'll stay with Mrs. Thompson, but Isaac, please don't do anything reckless." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Careful's my middle name." Despite his attempt at humor, Faith was not reassured. As she gathered her things and allowed Isaac to escort her to Mrs. Thompson's boarding house, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was preparing for something dangerous, something he didn't want her to know about. Mrs. Thompson welcomed Faith warmly, bustling about to prepare the spare room and chattering about the excitement in town over the possible arrival of the Tucker gang. Faith listened with half an ear, her thoughts on Isaac and what he might be planning. After supper, as Faith sat in Mrs. Thompson's parlor attempting to focus on grading papers, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Thompson answered it to find Isaac standing on the porch, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Evening, Mrs. Thompson," he greeted her politely. "Mind if I speak with Faith for a moment?" "Of course not, Mr. Thorne," Mrs. Thompson replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "I was just about to make some tea. Would you care for a cup?" "No, thank you," Isaac declined. "Won't be staying long." Mrs. Thompson retreated to the kitchen, giving them a semblance of privacy. Isaac moved to Faith's side, taking her hand in his. "Wanted to see you before I turn in," he said, his voice low. Faith studied his face, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his eyes continuously moved to the window. He was dressed for riding, sturdy boots, warm coat, his gun belt visible beneath the open front of his coat. "You're going after them, aren't you?" Faith asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Tonight." Isaac's slight hesitation was all the confirmation she needed. "Better to meet them on my terms than wait for them to come to town." "Isaac, please," Faith pleaded, gripping his hand tightly. "Wait for the marshal's deputy. Don't face them alone." "Deputy won't get here in time," Isaac said grimly. "Got word they were spotted at Wilson's Creek this afternoon." "That's less than 20 miles from here. They'll be in Carlin by morning if I don't stop them." "Then take the sheriff with you," Faith urged, "or some of the men from town." Isaac shook his head. "Sheriff needs to stay here to protect the town. And most of the men here are ranchers or shopkeepers, not gunfighters." His expression softened as he looked down at her. "This is what I do, Faith, what I've been trained for. Tears filled Faith's eyes as the reality of the situation hit her. Isaac was riding out to face multiple armed outlaws alone, possibly to his death. "I can't lose you," she whispered brokenly. "Not now. Not when we've just found each other." Isaac pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her tightly against him. "Not planning on dying tonight," he murmured into her hair. "Got too much to come back for." He drew back slightly, reaching into his pocket. "Got something for you." Faith watched through tear-blurred eyes as he withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. He opened it to reveal a simple ring, a band of silver with a small blue stone that caught the lamplight. "Belonged to my mother," Isaac explained, his voice rough with emotion. "Only thing I have left of hers. Want you to have it." He took a deep breath. "Want you to be my wife, Faith." "When this is over." A sob escaped Faith's throat, part joy, part fear. "Isaac, don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Just want you to know how I feel, want you to know I'm coming back." Faith took the ring with trembling fingers, then looked up at the man she loved, this complicated, wounded, brave man who had stolen her heart. "Yes," she said simply. "My answer is yes." The smile that transformed Isaac's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and full of promise. He took the ring from her and slid it onto her finger, then bent to kiss her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you, Faith Turner," he whispered against her lips. "Whatever happens, remember that." "I love you too," she replied, clinging to him as if she could keep him safe through sheer force of will. "Please come back to me." Isaac kissed her once more, deeply and desperately, before gently disentangling himself from her embrace. "Lock the doors after I leave," he instructed. "Stay inside until you hear from me or the sheriff." Faith nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched as Isaac strode to the door, his shoulders set with determination. At the threshold, he turned back, his eyes meeting hers one last time before he disappeared into the night. Mrs. Thompson returned from the kitchen to find Faith standing alone in the parlor, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Isaac's ring to her heart. "Oh, my dear," the older woman said softly, moving to embrace her. "He's going after them, isn't he?" Faith nodded, unable to speak. "That man loves you something fierce," Mrs. Thompson said, gently guiding Faith to a chair. "And he's as tough as they come. Have faith that he'll return." Faith nodded again, wiping away her tears. Faith, it was her name, her nature, and now it must be her comfort as she waited through the long night ahead, praying for Isaac's safe return. Sleep was impossible. Faith spent the night alternating between pacing Mrs. Thompson's parlor and staring out the window at the dark, silent street. Mrs. Thompson tried to persuade her to rest, but eventually gave up, keeping Faith company instead with quiet conversation and endless cups of tea. As dawn approached, Faith's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Every distant sound made her start. Was it gunfire? A rider approaching? But each time the sound faded, leaving only the growing light of day and her mounting fear. Sheriff Miller arrived just after sunrise, his face grave as he knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door. Faith's heart plummeted at the sight of him alone, his expression solemn. "Have you heard from Isaac?" she asked immediately, searching his face for any sign of hope. "No, Miss Turner," Miller replied, removing his hat, "but we found signs of a firefight about 10 miles outside town. Blood on the ground, shell casings." Faith swayed on her feet, and Mrs. Thompson quickly guided her to a chair. Was there a body?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "No bodies," Miller assured her, "but tracks heading west into the foothills. At least 3 horses, maybe more." "Isaac's ranch is that way," Faith realized, a flicker of hope kindling in her chest. "He might have gone there," Miller nodded. "That's what I figured. I'm heading out there now to check." "I'm coming with you," Faith said, rising decisively to her feet. Miller looked as if he might object, but something in Faith's expression stopped him. "All right," he conceded, "but you stay behind me if there's any sign of trouble." "Clear?" Faith nodded, already reaching for her coat. Mrs. Thompson hurried to pack some food and medical supplies, her practical nature asserting itself in the crisis. The ride to Isaac's ranch seemed interminable to Faith, though Sheriff Miller pushed their horses as fast as he dared on the snow-dusted trail. As they crested the final rise that would bring the ranch into view, Miller held up his hand, signaling Faith to stop. "Let me go first," he instructed, drawing his revolver. "Stay here until I call you." Faith wanted to protest but knew he was right. She watched anxiously as Miller rode slowly toward the cabin, his weapon at the ready. He circled the building once, then dismounted and approached the door cautiously. A long, tense moment passed before the door opened. Faith's heart leaped as Isaac appeared in the doorway, exchanging words with Miller. He was alive. But as Miller gestured toward her and Isaac's gaze followed, she could see even from a distance that something was wrong. Isaac was leaning heavily against the doorframe, and even in the pale morning light, she could make out dark stains on his clothing. Unable to wait any longer, Faith urged her horse forward, covering the remaining distance at a gallop. She practically fell from the saddle in her haste to reach Isaac, who had stepped out onto the porch despite Miller's apparent objections. "Isaac," Faith cried, running to him. As she reached the porch steps, she got her first clear look at him and her heart nearly stopped. Isaac's face was ashen beneath his tan, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left shoulder, blood seeping through the fabric. He held himself rigidly, one arm pressed against his side as if holding something in place. "Told you I'd come back," he said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace of pain. Faith was at his side in an instant, supporting him as his legs threatened to give way. "You're hurt," she said, stating the obvious as fear clutched at her heart. "We need to get you to a doctor." "Been shot before," Isaac replied, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. "I'll be fine." Sheriff Miller moved to Isaac's other side. "Let's get him inside," he directed Faith. "Then I'll ride for the doctor." Together, they helped Isaac back into the cabin and onto his bed. Faith quickly took charge, sending Miller to fetch water from the pump while she carefully removed Isaac's blood-stained shirt to assess his wounds. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. Isaac had been shot twice through wound on his left shoulder and a more serious injury to his right side, where the bullet appeared to be still lodged. He had done his best to bandage himself, but had clearly lost a significant amount of blood. The Tuckers. Faith asked as she gently cleaned the shoulder wound. Isaac nodded, his jaw clenched against the pain. "Ambushed them at the narrow pass. Got 2 of them, but the 3rd Jeb Tucker winged me before I could get to cover." He paused, drawing a labored breath. "Followed me back here. Waited till I was inside, then started shooting." "Where is he now?" Faith asked, fear spiking through her again at the thought of the remaining outlaw still at large. "Dead," Isaac replied flatly. "He tried to rush the cabin, made it as far as the porch." Faith glanced at the door, understanding now why Sheriff Miller had circled the cabin before approaching. "And the others?" "One dead at the pass. Other ones wounded bad, tied up in my barn." Isaac's eyes fluttered closed for a moment, his strength clearly waning. "Sheriff can take him in." As if summoned by his mention, Miller returned with a bucket of water. He took in the situation with a quick glance, his expression grim. "That side wound looks bad, Thorne. Need to get the bullet out," Isaac confirmed. "Faith, there's a bottle of whiskey in the cupboard. And my hunting knife needs to be heated in the fire." Faith blanched at the implication. "Isaac, no, we need to wait for the doctor." "Might not be that long," Miller interjected. "Doc Jenkins is making his rounds at the Peterson place. That's only about 5 miles from here." "Go," Faith urged him. "I'll do what I can until you return with him." After Miller departed, Faith worked quickly to make Isaac as comfortable as possible. She cleaned both wounds thoroughly, applied fresh bandages to the shoulder injury, and prepared compresses to slow the bleeding from his side. Isaac directed her with surprising calmness, his voice growing weaker but his instructions precise. "You've done this before," Faith observed as she placed another compress against his side. "Field medicine," Isaac confirmed. "Learn fast in war or you don't survive." Faith sat beside him on the bed, holding his hand as color drained from his face. "Stay with me, Isaac," she pleaded, fear gripping her heart as his eyes drifted closed. "The doctor will be here soon." "Not going anywhere," Isaac murmured, his fingers tightening weakly around hers. "Promised, didn't I?" Faith leaned down to kiss his forehead, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. Fever was setting in a dangerous sign. "You did promise, and I'm holding you to it." Isaac's eyes opened, finding hers with an effort. Still wearing the ring, he observed, a faint smile touching his lips. Faith glanced down at the silver band on her finger, the blue stone catching the light from the window. Of course I am. I'm going to be your wife, remember, Isaac whispered, his eyes drifting closed again. Going to build you a proper house. Right here, with a big porch, and a garden for you. His voice trailed off as he slipped into unconsciousness. Faith clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face as she prayed for the doctor to arrive in time. The next few hours passed in a blur of fear and desperate hope. Doc Jenkins arrived with Sheriff Miller and immediately set to work, extracting the bullet from Isaac's side with steady hands despite the primitive conditions. Faith assisted as best she could, holding instruments, providing fresh water, and comforting Isaac during the brief periods when pain brought him back to consciousness. He's lost a lot of blood, the doctor explained when the procedure was complete, and there's risk of infection. But he's strong, and the bullet didn't hit any vital organs. With proper care and a lot of rest, he should recover. Faith clung to those words as she maintained her vigil at Isaac's bedside through the day and into the night. Sheriff Miller returned to town with the captured outlaw, promising to send someone out with supplies the following day. Doc Jenkins left medicines and detailed instructions before departing, with a promise to return the next afternoon. Left alone with Isaac in the quiet cabin, Faith divided her time between tending to his wounds, preparing simple broths for when he woke, and praying for his recovery. She spoke to him constantly, whether he was conscious or not, telling him about her students, her plans for their future together, her love for him. It was during one of these one-sided conversations, as Faith was gently bathing Isaac's face with a cool cloth to combat his fever, that his eyes finally opened with some clarity. "Faith," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm here," she assured him, taking his hand in hers. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," Isaac replied with a weak attempt at humor. Twice, Faith laughed through her tears, relief washing over her at this sign of his returning strength. "You scared me half to death, Isaac Thorne." "Sorry about that," he murmured, his eyes never leaving her face. "You've been here the whole time," Faith nodded. "Where else would I be?" Isaac's hand tightened around hers. "Thought I might have dreamed it. You, the ring." "No dream," Faith assured him, raising their joined hands so he could see the ring on her finger. "I'm still here, still yours." A ghost of his smile touched Isaac's lips. "Good." Recovery was slow and difficult. Isaac's fever spiked again the following night, leaving him delirious and calling out against enemies only he could see. Faith held him through the worst of it, soothing him with gentle words and cool compresses until the fever finally broke near dawn. Doc Jenkins pronounced himself cautiously optimistic when he visited again, praising Faith's nursing skills and Isaac's stubborn will to live. Mrs. Thompson arrived with a basket of food and fresh linens, insisting on staying to help Faith for a few hours while she rested. Sheriff Miller brought news that the surviving Tucker brother had been transported to Carson City to stand trial. "You won't have to worry about them anymore," he assured Faith. "Between what happened here and the stagecoach robbery, he'll hang for sure." By the end of the week, Isaac was able to sit up in bed for short periods and take solid food. His strength returned gradually, and with it, his determination to care for himself. "You need to go back to town," he insisted one evening as Faith prepared supper in his small kitchen. "Your students need their teacher. School can wait another week," Faith replied firmly. "You're more important." Isaac shook his head. "Can't ask you to put your life on hold for me. I'm out of danger now." "You're not asking, I'm choosing," Faith pointed out, "and you're not fully recovered yet." "Stubborn woman," Isaac muttered, but there was affection in his voice. Faith smiled as she brought him a bowl of stew. "You're one to talk about stubborn." They reached a compromise. Faith would return to her teaching duties the following Monday, but would come to the ranch each afternoon after school. Sheriff Miller agreed to check on Isaac during the day, and several of the ranchers whose children attended Faith's school offered to help with Isaac's livestock until he was back on his feet. As winter settled over the Wyoming territory, Isaac's recovery continued. By December, he was able to move around the cabin with the aid of a walking stick and even venture out to the barn on good days. Faith divided her time between her school duties and caring for Isaac, finding a rhythm that worked for both of them. Christmas approached, bringing with it a sense of hope and renewal. Faith decorated Isaac's cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons, ignoring his half-hearted protests that such things were unnecessary. She baked cookies with her students, sending a large portion home with her for Isaac, who developed a particular fondness for her gingerbread. On Christmas Eve, Faith arrived at the cabin after the school's holiday pageant to find Isaac waiting for her on the porch, standing without his walking stick for the first time since the shooting. "Should you be out here in the cold?" she asked as she hurried up the steps, concern overriding her pleasure at seeing him upright. "Wanted to greet you properly," Isaac replied, drawing her into his arms. "Merry Christmas, Faith." Faith melted into his embrace, careful of his still healing wounds. "Merry Christmas, Isaac." Inside, she found the cabin transformed. A small pine tree stood in the corner, adorned with simple ornaments, some purchased from the general store, others clearly handmade from wood. A fire blazed in the hearth, and the table was set for a proper dinner, with candles waiting to be lit. "Isaac," Faith breathed, taking in the unexpected scene. "You did all this, had some help," Isaac admitted. "Mrs. Thompson brought the food, but I wanted to surprise you." "It's wonderful," Faith assured him, deeply touched by the effort he had made. They shared a beautiful Christmas Eve dinner, talking and laughing in the candlelight. As they finished the apple pie Mrs. Thompson had sent, Isaac reached across the table to take Faith's hand. "Been thinking," he said, his expression serious. "About the future, our future." Faith's heart quickened. "What about it?" "Don't want to wait anymore," Isaac declared. "Soon as I'm fully healed, want to get married, if you're still willing." Faith's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Of course I'm willing, nothing would make me happier." Isaac smiled, that rare, transformative smile that never failed to take Faith's breath away. "Good, because I've been working on something, want to show you." He led her to the small desk in the corner of the room where a set of papers lay neatly stacked. "Plans," he explained, spreading them out for her to see. "For the house I promised you, right here next to the cabin, with a big porch for sitting in the evenings and that garden you wanted. Even thought we might add a room for a nursery. Someday." Faith studied the carefully drawn plans, recognizing Isaac's precise hand in the neat lines and measurements. It was a simple design, but thoughtful windows positioned to catch the morning light, a large kitchen for teaching her students to bake, the promised porch wrapping around two sides of the house. "It's perfect," she whispered, leaning into his side. "When would we start building?" "Spring," Isaac replied. "When the ground thaws, could be ready by summer if we get help from town." "Our home," Faith said wonderingly, imagining their life together in this beautiful, peaceful place. "Home," Isaac agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "Never thought I'd have one again." "Not until you came along." Faith turned in his embrace to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. "You rescued me from those outlaws," she said softly. "But Isaac, you should know you've rescued me in so many other ways too." Isaac caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Way I see it, you're the one who did the rescuing, found me trapped in the darkness of my own mind, showed me there was still light in the world, still hope. Then we rescued each other," Faith concluded, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Isaac responded with a tenderness that still had the power to make her heart race, his arms encircling her completely as if he never intended to let her go. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Faith Turner," he whispered. "Soon to be Faith Thorne." "Merry Christmas, my love," she replied, knowing that the greatest gift she had received this year was standing right before her, this brave, wounded, wonderful man who had found the courage to love again, and in doing so had given her the home and family she had always longed for. Spring arrived in Wyoming territory with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. As the land awakened from its winter slumber, Faith and Isaac's plans took shape both for their wedding and for their future home. Construction on the house began in April, with many of the townspeople pitching in to help. Faith was touched by how the community had embraced them as a couple, offering not only labor, but also wedding gifts, everything from hand-stitched quilts to practical household items. Isaac had recovered fully from his wounds, though the bullet in his side had left him with a slight limp that became more pronounced when he was tired. It did nothing to diminish his strength or capabilities, however, and he threw himself into the building of their home with a determination that inspired everyone around him. Their wedding was set for the first Saturday in May, to be held in the meadow by the creek on Isaac's ranch. As the day approached, Faith found herself busier than ever, dividing her time between teaching, helping with the house construction, and preparing for the ceremony. The night before the wedding, Faith stayed in town at Mrs. Thompson's boarding house, honoring the tradition that the groom shouldn't see the bride before the ceremony. As she lay in bed, too excited to sleep, Faith reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. Less than a year ago, she had been a lonely schoolteacher from Boston, traveling to an unknown frontier town to start a new life. Now, she was about to marry a man who had captured her heart with his quiet strength and hidden depths, a man who had rescued her from danger, and then allowed her, slowly and patiently, to rescue him from the prison of his past. Morning dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect Wyoming blue that matched the color of Isaac's eyes. Mrs. Thompson helped Faith dress in the wedding gown they had created together, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Faith's hair was arranged in a loose upswept style, with sprigs of wildflowers woven through the golden strands. Sheriff Miller arrived to escort her to the ranch, having volunteered to stand in for the father she had lost. "You look beautiful, Miss Turner," he said gruffly as he helped her into the flower-decorated wagon. "Thorne's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Faith replied, her heart full to bursting with happiness. The ride to the ranch seemed both interminable and too short. As they approached, Faith could see that the meadow had been transformed. Rows of chairs faced a simple arch constructed of twisted branches and decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. Nearly everyone from Carlin had turned out for the occasion, filling the seats and spilling over onto blankets spread on the grass. And there, waiting beneath the arch, stood Isaac. He wore a new black suit that Mrs. Thompson had insisted on altering to fit his tall frame perfectly. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved, but it was his expression that caught and held Faith's attention as Sheriff Miller helped her down from the wagon. Isaac was looking at her as if she were a miracle, as if he couldn't quite believe that this moment was real. The love and wonder in his eyes brought tears to Faith's own as she took Sheriff Miller's arm for the short walk to the arch. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Reverend Parker from the Carlin Church officiated, speaking of love's power to heal and transform. Isaac and Faith had written their own vows, and when the time came to speak them, Isaac's voice rang out clear and confident, so different from the taciturn man who had rescued Faith from the stagecoach robbery less than a year ago. "Faith Turner," he began, taking her hands in his. "Before you came into my life, I was a man half dead walking through the world but not really living in it. You saw something in me worth saving when I'd given up on myself. You brought light to my darkness, hope to my despair, and love to a heart I thought was beyond feeling." He paused, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "I promise to spend every day of our life together trying to be worthy of the gift you've given me. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and cherish you through whatever challenges we may face. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your faithful husband for all the days of my life." Tears flowed freely down Faith's cheeks as she listened to Isaac's heartfelt words. When it was her turn to speak, she had to take a deep breath to steady her voice. "Isaac Thorne," she said, squeezing his hands. "You came into my life like an answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd made. You rescued me not just from danger, but from a future without the kind of love I'd always dreamed of finding. In your quiet strength, I found my safety. In your gentle heart, I found my home." She smiled through her tears. "I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings us. I promise to be your confidante, your support, and your loving wife. I promise to help you see the goodness in yourself that I see so clearly. And I promise to love you, fully and completely, for all the days of our life together." As Isaac slipped his mother's ring onto Faith's finger, now accompanied by a simple gold band, a palpable sense of rightness settled over them. When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, and Isaac bent to kiss his bride, the cheers from their friends and neighbors seemed to echo the joy in their own hearts. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables laden with food were set up near the construction site of their new home, allowing everyone to admire the progress. Music and dancing filled the meadow as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities. As twilight deepened, Isaac led Faith away from the crowd, down the path to their special spot by the creek. The cottonwood trees were in full leaf now, creating a canopy of green above the flowing water. "Happy, Mrs. Thorne?" Isaac asked, drawing her into his arms. "Completely," Faith assured him, leaning into his embrace. "And you, more than I ever thought possible," Isaac replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Keep thinking I might wake up and find this was all a dream." Faith reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jaw with gentle fingers. "Not a dream, just the beginning of our story." Isaac bent to kiss her, pouring all his love and gratitude into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, he kept her close in the circle of his arms, unwilling to let even an inch of space come between them. "Should we go back to our guests?" Faith asked, though she made no move to leave his embrace. Isaac shook his head. "They're celebrating fine without us. Besides, I wanted a moment alone with my wife." The word wife sent a thrill through Faith that she suspected would never fade, no matter how many times she heard it. "And I wanted a moment alone with my husband," she replied, savoring the answering word. They stood together by the creek, talking softly about their plans for the future, the completion of their house, the expansion of Isaac's horse breeding business, Faith's ideas for the school, the children they hoped to have someday. As darkness fell completely, bringing with it a canopy of stars above the cottonwoods, Faith felt a sense of perfect contentment. In this quiet man with his wounded past and his capacity for profound love, she had found everything she had ever wanted. And in her, Isaac had found the faith to believe in second chances, the courage to step out of the prison of his mind and into a future brighter than either of them could have imagined. As they walked hand in hand back to the celebration, Faith knew that their journey was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, joys and sorrows to share, a life to build together. But with Isaac by her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. After all, they had rescued each other once. They could do it again and again for all the days of their lives. Epilogue: 5 years later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front porch of the Thorne homestead, as Faith stood in the doorway, watching the scene before her with a heart full of contentment. Isaac sat in one of the rocking chairs he had crafted with his own hands, their 3-year-old son William perched on his lap as he patiently demonstrated how to whittle a simple shape from a piece of pine wood. "Careful now," Isaac instructed, his large hands guiding his son's much smaller ones. "Always cut away from yourself." William nodded solemnly, his brow furrowed in concentration as he mimicked his father's movements. With his dark hair and serious expression, he was the image of Isaac, though his eyes were Faith's warm brown rather than his father's intense blue. On the porch steps sat their 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth, absorbed in a book of fairy tales, her golden curls catching the sunlight as she sounded out words with careful determination. She had inherited not only Faith's appearance, but also her love of learning, already showing promise as a student despite her young age. Faith cradled their newest addition, 6-month-old James, against her shoulder, feeling the solid weight of him as he slept peacefully, one tiny fist clutched in the fabric of her dress. He had arrived during a fierce winter storm, with only Isaac to help with the delivery until the doctor could make it through the snow-blocked roads. It had been a frightening night, but the sight of Isaac holding his newborn son with tears of joy streaming unashamedly down his face had made every moment of fear worthwhile. As if sensing her gaze, Isaac looked up, his eyes finding hers across the porch. The smile that spread across his face, no longer rare, though no less breathtaking, sent a familiar warmth through Faith's chest. "Mama," William called out, noticing her presence. "Look what Papa's teaching me." "I see," Faith replied, moving to join them on the porch. "You're being very careful, just like Papa showed you." Isaac shifted William to one knee, making space for Faith and the baby on the wide rocking chair. As she settled beside them, Isaac's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. "How's the little one?" he asked, gently stroking James's downy head with a finger that seemed enormous compared to the infant's skull. "Fast asleep," Faith replied. "Mrs. Peterson says he's the most contented baby she's ever seen." "Takes after his mother," Isaac observed, pressing a kiss to Faith's temple. "Always finding the good in everything." Faith leaned into his embrace, surveying the home they had built together. The house had turned out even better than Isaac's original plans, a spacious, comfortable dwelling with plenty of room for their growing family. The garden she had planted flourished, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for their windowsills. Beyond it, the corral held the horses that had made Isaac's breeding operation increasingly successful, with buyers coming from as far away as California for his carefully trained stock. But the greatest blessing of all was the transformation in Isaac himself. The haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence and deep contentment. He still had nightmares occasionally. Faith doubted those would ever completely disappear, but they came less frequently now, and he no longer faced them alone. Most remarkable was the change in his relationship with the community. Once the most solitary man in Carlin, Isaac was now an integral part of town life, serving on the school board, teaching the older boys woodworking skills, helping neighbors with building projects. The taciturn, wounded soldier had become a respected husband, father, and citizen, though he maintained a reserve that Faith found as appealing now as she had when they first met. "Penny for your thoughts," Isaac said softly, noticing her contemplative expression. Faith smiled, reaching up to touch his face, a face now as familiar to her as her own, yet still capable of taking her breath away. "I was just thinking how blessed we are, how far we've come." Isaac's eyes held hers, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Long way from that stagecoach robbery." "And yet it seems like yesterday," Faith mused. "I was so frightened until you appeared." "Best thing I ever did," Isaac said simply, "riding to your rescue that day." "I think we rescued each other," Faith replied, echoing words she had spoken on their wedding day. Isaac's arm tightened around her shoulders, still doing it every day. Elizabeth looked up from her book, her expression curious. "What did you rescue Mama from, Papa?" Isaac and Faith exchanged a glance, sharing a private smile at their daughter's question. It was Isaac who answered, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence he reserved for their children. "Well, Lizzie girl, it happened like this. Your mama was on a stagecoach coming to Carlin to be the new teacher." As Isaac began the tale that had become a family legend, Faith closed her eyes briefly, savoring the moment, the weight of baby James in her arms, the sound of Isaac's deep voice, the giggles of their older children as the story progressed. This was everything she had ever wanted, though she hadn't known it until a taciturn cowboy with haunted eyes had rescued her from danger, and in doing so, set them both on a path to healing and love. The prison of Isaac's mind had long since crumbled, replaced by the wide open spaces of a life filled with purpose and joy. And Faith, who had once been alone in the world, was now surrounded by the family she and Isaac had created together, a family bound not by blood alone, but by the love and understanding of two people who had seen the best in each other when it mattered most. As the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Faith knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this life, this love was where she had always been meant to be.